At the beginning of our worship services, we often say these important words. A long time ago, there was someone who did many wonderful things and said many wonderful things, and so people became curious about that person. They asked Jesus, "Who are you?" Jesus gave them many answers, but one of them was, "I am the light." And then we light the Christ candle. Jesus said and did many wonderful things. But it's worth noting that leading up to today's gospel reading in Luke, Jesus has said and done almost nothing. And indeed, this week's lectionary passage, which actually stops after the temptation in the wilderness, in this passage even, Jesus continues to essentially say nothing, quoting instead the scriptures, quoting instead the wisdom of his ancestors. If you scan through the first 3 chapters of Luke, angels speak of who Jesus will be and who John will be as the one who prepares for Jesus. Women speak of who Jesus will be and who John will be as the one who prepares for Jesus. An elder who has suffered with the inability to speak by mouth for months breaks his silence to say who John will be as the one who prepares for Jesus. Homeless day laborers witness Jesus and share the news of Jesus with those who would listen to day laborers all riled up at night. A man nearing death tells who Jesus will be, a childless octogenarian who spent most of her life in the temple as a prophet in a religious institution that doesn't handle the voices of women with equity, gave thanks for Jesus. These 2 elders then noticed that the changing of tide in God's work was coming, and they released their time here to prepare to enter into the mysteries of the eternal. The one time Jesus speaks in Luke's Gospels leading up to this passage is when he snuck away from his parents to spend more time at the temple, more time listening and praying and learning and discerning. A remarkable and remarkably odd child, he told his parents, "Didn't you know I would be at the temple?" That's the one time he says anything. Then John preaches of righteousness that is anchored in mutual care and equity. And as he does, he tells people that Jesus is coming. Despite knowing Jesus as his cousin, he doesn't even name Jesus, though. He speaks more of the movement Jesus will inspire than of the Jesus who will inspire it. Then, penultimately, God chimes in Luke, in the form of almost a Patronus from Harry Potter, something that looks kind of like a dove, rests on Jesus, and a voice says to Jesus, not to the crowd, this intimate moment with Jesus, "You are my child, in whom I am well pleased." And the final voice that we hear leading up to today's passage is the voice of the ancestors. There is a genealogy calling forth the stories of the ancestors to testify to who this person is, and that it is the God, literally, of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob who is about to do something new in and with this person. And in a few verses, Jesus will preach. But first, he will allow the words of his ancestor Isaiah to fill the room. And his first sermon is only to add to Isaiah's words, "Today, this is happening in your hearing." Wouldn't you like that short of a sermon? Jesus of Luke 1-4 is a quiet and intentional person. And in today's lectionary passage, it actually stops when the devil stops tempting Jesus. Leading up to that, Jesus is a contemplative person, full of intention, prayer, and the mingling of the stories of the ancestors and the community that raised him, and the homeless day laborers, and the elders in the temple, looking at a changing of a tide and releasing the future of their faith tradition into the story Jesus would weave, empowered by the Spirit and surrounded by a community who mirrors his intention, prayer, and commitment to the new thing that is rising up from the already in progress story of the elders. When tempted with security, Jesus listened to the voices of the ancestors and spirit dancing together and chose to hold to Jesus' intentions of a new and renewed way of being that trusts something more mystical and powerful than even the beauty of bread. When tempted with power, Jesus listened to the voices of the ancestors swirling with the quiet leading of spirit and chose to hold on to the intentions of a wholeness for all that is not anchored by power of empire, but with the spirit. When tempted with renown, Jesus listened to the meek voices of ancestors and spirit as they wooed Jesus toward the sacred way of humility and love. And when the temptation is done, Jesus returns. Jesus enters the sacred space where his community gathers to listen to the ancestors and remember the stories that have brought them to this moment and will guide them through the next moment and the next moment and the next moment and the next moment. Jesus takes up the scroll of the wise ancestor Isaiah, who was probably not just one ancestor, but a whole community of wise, intentional, prayerful, observant ancestors. And Jesus brings those words to the people's hearts and minds. And all Jesus adds to this is, now is the time. This week, I'll be beginning 4 weeks off of time to rest and restore after 2 years of what I would certainly call a wilderness time. This week, we'll transition to being led by Reverend Shanja Jha, a wise sibling who listens deeply to the ancestors, who is with and for those on the margins, and who loves to play in the realm where the past leads into an innovative future, carrying our ancient tradition into a new generation of what church might look like. Similar to Jesus inviting the people to sit with the words of Isaiah, Shanja will ask us to listen to the words of Jeremiah as if they are coming to us now, as if those words are, as Jesus might say, being fulfilled in our hearing. This week, we'll transition to our Lenten journey, one that mirrors Jesus' time in the wilderness, but really one that mirrors Jesus' time leading up to Jesus' ministry. A time filled with listening, meditation, prayer, wondering, wandering, and intention. I've shared with you, and Tamra will send out each week, one journaling question a day for Lent. They are brief. Some only ask for a few words. Of course, if you are like me, you can feel free to respond to the request for a few words with a novel. But it's not a huge time commitment. It's an intention commitment. What it is a guide in intention. We all know that the world is changing rapidly, far too rapidly for most of our likings. But this is the time we live in. Many of us, if asked, may have chosen a different time, but this is our time. We all know that what church looks like in the world is changing rapidly, far too rapidly for most of our likings. And it is both okay and important to bring that distaste for change, or maybe exhaustion from change. After leading the tide of change starting in 1987, it is okay to be tired and grieved that change still calls us. Many of us, if asked, would say the church needs to take a break from change. To me, that doesn't seem to be the way the Spirit is moving us, though. But maybe. Either way, it is okay to name our exhaustion, frustration, wishing for another time, wishing for what was. It's part of the intentional time in Lent. In our Ash Wednesday service, we said that grief is a good and perfect gift from God. It is okay and even wonderful to receive the gift, the good and perfect gift of grief right now. But this all is a bit of a digression. My intention is to say that today begins a journey of intention. I invite you as disciples of Christ to mirror Christ, to live with intention, to live listening to the voices of others, live listening to voices from the margins, such as the shepherds and widowed prophetesses. Live listening to the ancestors. Live listening to the scriptures. Live listening to the conversations happening in and around the church. Live listening to the voice of Spirit who dances in and among all of these things, like a hardworking honeybee collecting nectar and cross-pollinating the world all the while. Live as an intentional listener, wondering about what will happen next, and whose voices and what wisdom you will need. Beyond bread, beyond power, beyond shows of strength, whose voices will you need to carry us through the work of meeting God's liberating, just, and loving, welcoming future? Live as intentional listeners, preparing to do something together that will embody the words of Isaiah echoed by Christ. The Spirit of the loving and just one who is the true ruler of this earth is on us, because she/they have anointed us to proclaim the good news to the poor. She/they have sent us to proclaim freedom for prisoners and recovery of sight for the blind, to set the oppressed free, to proclaim the year of Creator's powerful favor. Live as a community of intentional listeners. And prayers, you all. Live as those preparing to somehow live out right here in this building and in this moment and in the lives we share as a community, an eternal echo of Christ's audacious claim, today these words are being fulfilled in your hearing. I am giddy, you all. I am giddy to see how Spirit will reverberate between Reverend Jaw's words and Jeremiah's text and each of your hearts and the world unfolding around us. May we all live these wonderful and wonderful 4 weeks with prayerful listening and intentionality.